So when we talk about fisheries, a lot of our impressions are based on the power of images of figures past and present. So here, this is a picture of halibut in the 1890s. Halibut are the second largest teleost, the bony fish in the North Atlantic, second only to bluefin tuna. But one of the things that's clear is that this stock was depleted. Again, this is the fishery records back to 1893, but by 1993, it had clearly gone way past whatever was sustainable, and now it's relegated to primarily a discard fishery. Another fishery that showed an early abundance but was subsequently depleted very quickly was redfish. This is also a very abundant stock within the Gulf of Maine, and here you see the sequential depletion of various stocks. These various colors refer to statistical areas or regions within the North Atlantic where commercial harvesting occurs, going from 3 is in the north, heading towards the Grand Banks, and the red is around here, this part of the world. Now, another kind of powerful image is the what's known as fishing down the food web. This is done by a scientist named Daniel Pauly. And there's a lot going on in this slide here, but it's kind of capturing progression over time, depth, and species composition. So in the early days, there was a rich benthic fauna, a large abundance of very large fish, a blend of all different species and so forth. But as you go over time, and with the intensity of fishing, you have the depletion of the larger bodied fish and a reliance on smaller ones, and then a depauperate benthic environment. That's kind of a bleak picture, and it's another kind of instrumental piece was a paper known as the Tragedy of the Commons, and many of you are probably familiar with this paper in terms of which describes resource abundance and usage. And there's a quote in there by a philosopher, a writer, and he just talks about what is tragedy. And in the Greek tragedy, it's not unhappiness, it's the remorseless working of things. That is, no matter what the character does, the outcome is preordained. So it's saying that when you have a common property resource, that you will end up with some sort of a tragedy, meaning a depleted resource and inappropriate or non-sustainable use. Now, there's other images which are equally powerful, and we talk about fisheries management. And so here we have the crisis clinic problem, and I mentioned the common property resource. Fisheries management is difficult. You have shifting baselines. People forget that in 1893 that there were 7,000 metric tons a year being harvested of Atlantic halibut, and sort of resign themselves to very small or low levels now. There are always issues of allocation, whether it's between states, or between inshore and offshore fisheries, small boats versus big boats, various ports. There's always issues of who gets to harvest. There's an inelastic demand. That is, people will pay any price, so the price will often go up as the stock declines. So as the price goes up, it becomes profitable, even though the quantities of fish being landed are going downward. And then fishermen are always getting better. They have electronic gear that can continuously improve their ability to capture fish and find them, so forth. There are a lot of different multiple jurisdictions associated with fishing, whether it's the federal, state, or local levels. I'll give you a little bit of insight into that. I work for National Marine Fisheries Service. At any given time, we have about 100 lawsuits pending. People, upset with the regulations, or both on the commercial fishing side, the recreational side, or the NGOs, in terms of not being prescriptive or restrictive enough. So when we start to look at why these things are so complicated, there are these boxes represent. Oops, there we go. These boxes represent the various fishery management plans, and these quantities here. There are two councils, fishery management councils. The first is the New England Fishery Management Council. The second is the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. And then there's another group called the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So there's kind of a labyrinth here of stocks. And some of these stocks are managed jointly. In fact, spiny dogfish is managed not only by the New England Council, it's managed by the Mid-Atlantic Council, and it's managed by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So someone said, Paul, these are really ugly colors. And I said, yep, I have no taste, but this is an ugly situation as well, that there are so many different, varying bodies working to manage these resources. So is it really all doom and gloom? My colleague Ray Hilborn, has done some, really nice work there in terms of describing, the state of the world's fisheries. And actually, it's a more optimistic picture, because I think there are a lot of hopeful signs, and that we are turning the corner in a variety of ways. And so I will give you some insight as to what these different ways are. But I think it's good to step back and consider what Churchill said. I mean, that if we argue between the past and the present, we're not going to be looking forward to the future. So surely that will be lost. And the second kind of important quote is by Michael Graham. Michael Graham was a fisheries scientist, and he was addressing the United Nations in 1950. And you recall that this was right after the war. And because of the kind of difficulty of running a fishing boat around the coast of Europe during that time, fishing was pretty much over. And, but in response, there was a dramatic increase in a whole host of species. And it was really that kind of observation kind of crystallized a lot of the theory underlying fisheries science, because it showed that you could harvest populations, and that by reducing some fishing activity, you could ultimately get larger stocks and more revenue and a more sustainable resource. And so, but he said that no matter what you think, we've got to do some actions here. We don't have time for the nerds and the guys like myself to get their minds in order. That there is a need to begin on the path to managing the world's resources. So tonight, I won't be able to cover everything. Maybe if I get 2/3 of what I have in my slides across, I'll be happy. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the successful instances of rebuilding. Talk specifically about groundfish and the haddock recovery. Compare that with cod. Cod is far more iconic than haddock. And has not suffered, not had the same fate. And then look at some of the issues related to rebuilding. So when stocks have rebuilt, how has that occurred? So in recovery of the United States, I mean, in the Northeast, for example, striped bass, was a very successful story in terms of a massive change in people's perspective of the resource during a period of closure and subsequent recovery. Scallops were another stock that has done famously well. It's gone from a $100 million fishery in 1995 to about a $500 million fishery last year. So it's an enormous change, not only in quantity but revenue and a branding that has made this a worldwide product. And then finally, there's the unfortunate dogfish that I've happened to work on as well. And one of the things that I did point out in this is that we don't get to pick and choose who gets to recover and who doesn't. This is the agony of recovery, and all the challenges associated with bringing this stock back to full level of abundance. And I'm going to talk about our update. So this is a report that was is nearing completion. It should be available in the next couple of days. It'll be available on this website here. And it was a fairly comprehensive review of the 20 fish that were in one of those boxes on that earlier slide. So these are known as the groundfish stocks. And when we describe the status of stocks, there are a number of ways to do it. And this will be kind of a shorthand. I'll be referring to this slide and a number of subsequent slides as well. But when we look, we have some target levels, which we call BMSY, or the biomass that sustains maximum sustainable yield. And then we have a fishing mortality rate that is also what's the optimal rate of harvest. Like Jonathan said earlier, those are some kind of key things to do. So if you're below this, if your current level is below the target, you're in an overfished condition. That is, the stock is too low for optimal sustainable yield. If you're fishing, if the biomass is above this level, this ratio, then it's not overfished and so forth. Now, if you're harvesting them too fast, we call that overfishing. So if you're overfishing, that means that your fishing mortality rate exceeds 1, and you're taking, so you have overfishing occurring across this top row. And if you are doing all the right things, that is, you have the stock at a biomass that exceeds the target level, and you're not overfishing, we call this no overfishing and not overfished. Now, this is kind of unique because we're the only discipline that I know that calls success by a double negative, so that we are in fact, doing the right thing if we got this, we're achieving this double negative. So if we look at the template for the recent updates and so forth, we don't have any in that upper right-hand box. Nothing up here, but we do have quite a few stocks that are sort of in the success category. There are 7 stocks there. These include George's Bank haddock, Gulf of Maine haddock, plaice, redfish, whitehake, pollock, and window pane flounder. Those are the problem stocks. These are the problem ones. So that's Gulf of Maine cod, yellowtail, southern New England yellowtail, George's Bank winter flounder, and wedge flounder. So there are a lot of kind of scorecards, and I'll go going through the next one here. But there are some important stocks, and these are the ones we'll talk about: George's Bank haddock, Gulf of Maine haddock, pollock, and redfish. So these are ones that are doing exceptionally well, that have recovered and are moving along quite nicely. So we call these the green stocks here. So these stocks there's no overfishing occurring, and they're no longer overfished. And so these stocks are the ones we'll be kind of focusing on. These are the ones that are doing well. Now, I want to just dispel the notion that I don't have a twin sister named Pollyanna Rago, because it's not all good. I mean, there are certainly restrictions on harvest, and there are things that make it impossible to harvest these things. And one of the things is that haddock tend to hang out with the wrong crowd, and the wrong crowd are caught. So because they're caught so frequently, you have a problem in terms of capturing, adequately harvesting. So the historical record for any fishermen in the room, that there was very little full utilization of haddock, and one of the reasons is that they have problems. And so it's people like Steve Ayers and others that are working on technological solutions that are helping to allow for successful harvest of abundant stocks like haddock, and yet protect those that are doing less well, like cod, so forth. And then there are some stocks where we're no longer overfishing, but they remain overfished. So these are kind of stubborn. They didn't read the book about what they should be doing, and so they're continuing to have on their path to recovery. We've got the conditions right for recovery, but we have not yet realized successful recovery. And then there are other stocks, for a variety of reasons, that we either have difficulty discerning what their status is, or we know it and it's bad. And so these are what we call the unknown and red stocks here. And so this includes, again, many of the important species. But if we look in aggregate, so let's take a look at the biomass that occurs from our stock assessments, and we look at this trajectory going from 1985 through 2014. You can see a progressive large increase in overall biomass commencing right about 1994. So that's an important year. We'll come back to that. But you know, the redfish are doing well. This one in the middle here is the Gulf Georges Bank haddock, excuse me, and then this one is pollock. Now, we're concerned about pollock. I mean, we don't know if this is completely a valid estimate of that. But one of the things that pollock do is that they swim fast. They also swim out of the range of our gear, and most fishermen will say they have difficulty catching pollock. So this creates a situation where we can't validate necessarily the abundance estimates, so it becomes known as a cryptic biomass, which is certainly reassuring to everyone in terms of our ability to detect it. But you know, we are concerned about this one. But if you look at the big trends here, you know, the black line shows the rate of change of the abundant species, pollock, haddock, and redfish, and they've gone from about 200,000 metric tons to about 900,000 metric tons. So looking on this axis here. Now, in order to get these two things on the same graph, I had to change the axis here. So in terms of the other species, the cod and the flatfish species, they started out at about 140,000 metric tons and have gone down to about 40,000 metric tons over the same time period. So this is a really dramatic change, and there are a lot of underlying factors for that, and certainly it provides a lot of opportunities for additional research. But on this one, I guess you'll be able to see it. Yeah, this is kind of a picture of Georges Bank haddock and how it's changed over time. And on the bottom, we have the trajectory of the abundance indices, what we see in our surveys. And on the top, you can see the spatial distribution of that. And these are, it's a moving 10-year window, so it's kind of giving you a picture of where they started and where they end on this one. So in this case, you can see for the restoration that's occurred has them spread out all over the bank compared to where they started. For Gulf of Maine haddock, we have kind of a similar picture. The concentrations were low, start high at the beginning, became very small. As we get into this part of the slide, you can see them starting to spread out. Again, another decline. But in recent years, we're seeing a vast increase in the distribution. So it gives you some idea, some visual impression of what's going on in terms of where they are and their use of the habitat. Now, the habitat is changing, and some of you are present in the room who published a very important paper recently in Science, talking about how the failure to accommodate the environmental change really was an important factor in terms of sort of aiding and abetting some of the decline that we've seen. And so this paper kind of highlights that. But there's other papers too that kind of talk about the comeback and the comeback of a very important, what's called the northern cod stock as of Newfoundland, that is since returned. And maybe the same factors that cause the decline here that are causing the increase there. But it does point out to a very important factor, which is the underlying environment plays an important role in how it interacts with the harvesting of the fisheries. So we can take a look at these two slides, and they're running simultaneously. So they're running from what has happened to cod and its decline, what's happened to haddock and its increase. And so you can see on the left the depletion, and on the right the increase of haddock on Georges Bank. So I'll run the same slide. There's kind of an inverse relationship going on here. Let's look at it for the Gulf of Maine. Same kind of thing. Starts out, bounces around at moderately high levels, but has a drop to very low levels. In the Gulf of Maine, we saw this one a moment ago. And you can kind of see that this sort of concentration. One of the important things you'll see in this slide, we'll talk more about this in a minute, is this very high degree of concentration west of 70 degrees. And that's an important part in terms of the dynamics of the resource. So is this a typical response in the Northeast? I mean, do we have this sort of reciprocity going on? Well, I would assert that we don't. And in fact, if you look at this chart again, this is just to reorient yourself to what we'll be looking at in terms of the relationship between fishing biomass and fishing mortality. If you look at the stocks managed by the New England Fishery Management Council, you have the problem stocks here, but many of the stocks are below the FMSY or the overfishing level. If we look at the ones managed by the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council, all of their stocks are in the no-no zone. You know, the not overfished and no overfishing is occurring. If we look at the jointly managed one, again we see them there. And if you combine these all together, you get this plot, which when you take the next level. So okay, so we have 5 stocks that are where we have overfishing and overfish condition. There's 4 stocks where overfishing is occurring and the stocks remain overfished. And then we have 25 stocks which are doing quite well across the Northeast. So, you know, just to come back to that earlier point, we are in a situation where things in general are improving. However, we do have some iconic and highly problematic stocks. And of course, all of this doesn't address the issue of harvesting these things. And so, you know, because of limiting factors, you simply can't extract the thing. It's not like a forestry where you can go in and identify each of the individual trees and say this is the one I want to take. In a fishery, you know, it's far less selective. So you have to get a lot smarter in order to find the fish and find out how to take them out. So let's go a little bit into the haddock dynamics and so forth, and a little more detail here. In terms of the red bars here reflect recruitment, and the black line there reflects the spawning stock biomass. And so prior to 1960, there was a fairly regular pattern of recruitment, and it led to a couple of very strong year classes, which led to very high abundances of spawning stock biomasses. And I'll show you the concept. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Recruitment is the numbers of age 1 fish entering the population. These are the baby fish that are born each year. Yeah. Oh, and I'm used to being interrupted, so I've got 3 kids. So you know, so please, you know, if there is something where I'm blowing past a definition, sure.
I'd like to ask you.
Uh-huh.
When do they get started?
Start harvesting 3 to 4 years old. You know, so they grow fairly rapidly, and most of them are mature by 4 and 5 years old. So yeah, they're not something like a witch flounder, gray sole may mature at 10 to 12 years old. Dogfish mature at up to 15 years old. So, so there's a lot of variation, and that is an important point because that underlies productivity of the resource. So if you compare, you know, redwoods to slash pine, you know, one grows very fast, the other one grows very slow, lives around a long time. So there's a lot of things like that to take into consideration. So then, following this massive decline, you can see it's going from, you know, relatively high levels. It was dropped down to very low levels, and the spawning stock became far more intermittent. The recruitment, you know, was a much lower level, and you know, there were a number of years where you know, you got a couple of year classes, new babies came in, spiked up the spawning stock biomass. The spawning stock biomass is the aggregate biomass or total weight of all the spawners in the population. So all the parents of these fish. And you know, only in about 1994, some major events happened. As I said, I'll come back to this, but we started to get a little more regular patterns. The stocks were protected, and all of a sudden we got a year class that was enormous. Let's see what did this mean for the fishery? Let's go back again. So the blue panel here, the purple, I guess, is what was harvested. And you know, the harvest was, you know, spiked up after that 63-year class to near record levels. But the fishing intensity was so great, it dropped that spawning stock biomass down to a very low level. And this is the fishing mortality rate on the population. So it also spiked up during that period and has kind of fluctuated, but it only really dropped to low levels about 1994. And you know, the question is, you know, well, would this 2003 year class, the one that's back here, this very high peak here, you know, would this do the same thing? So this is the question we asked in 2004. Well, to fast forward to the present, this is from our most recent assessment, and the answer is no. The very high levels, this is again the catch that we see on the bars and the fishing mortality rate and the red. You know, the catch from the 2003 year class, even though it was very large, was nowhere near as large as the catches that were served from that 1963, nor has it stabilized. Here's slow and steady, year after year, pretty much the same catches. Now it's much more of a roller coaster effect. If we look at the recruitment that's occurred and what's going on now, I draw your attention, and these had to change the scale yet again, because the recruitment that we saw in the last 3 years, 2013 in particular, was an enormous one that we've never really seen before. So that's this line there shows the change. So it's an open-ended question as to whether this largesse will be able to harvest. But let's look a little bit more in terms of age structure. What was the composition of this resource? And this slide shows so that 1963 year class, which fueled very high record overall landings, and then a couple of trajectories. Now this line on the you have age on the bottom, so this is sort of like is each one's growing older, and then these are the year in which they were born is on the y-axis. And so, you know, as you're moving down this thing, you can kind of track the cohort. So these are like the baby boomers here. You know, so we'll call this the baby boomer generation. So, you know, this year class is you know, pretty much gone now. But you know, this was kind of like a pig in a python. You know, it was kind of moving through the population structure over time. And, you know, we've subsequently seen a couple of big ones. 1998 occurred like 4 years after 1994. 1994 was a big year, come back. And then this 2003 was a big year class. And now we have kind of an unprecedented circumstance where we have a large number of large year classes simultaneously present in the population. One of the things that occurred is sort of an overall reduction in the age composition during this period when we had, you know, fish up to age 15. During the late 80s, early 90s, and so forth, the population was kind of carved out. But because of the intensity of fishing, because of the absence of strong year classes, the abundance of those intermediate aged fish sort of fell off the charts. So what other factors might be causing some of the rebuilding to occur? Well, one of these is the spatial concentration. So you saw the picture earlier of how the stocks, you know, swelled and contracted over time. And if we look at this concentration, this is a yellowtail flounder example, and what we see is the fraction of the total resource that's within a particular strata. This happens to be a strata on George's Bank. And one of the ways that you monitor that or quantify this degree of concentration is called a Gini index. And it's not named for a wizard or anything like that. It's actually an Italian statistician. And he was looking at wealth concentration, so something that's certainly, in the news these days. And so it was the idea of like how concentrated is wealth within a population. The same thing can be applied to how concentrated are fish within the population. And so if you have a low Gini index, it's kind of spread out. The blue circle represents the habitat. The yellow circle represents the distribution of the population. And as you get to a very high Gini index, here you have the population is in a very small quantity of the habitat. This is exactly what's going on in this graph. It's showing that Georges Bank through 2005 had a very high concentration of fish in a very small area of Georges Bank. That same thing is going on for cod. These are just some indices of abundance in our surveys and in the commercial catch. And you can see all of them are trending upwards. So the main take-home point is that a resource that was at one time distributed quite abundantly over the entire Gulf of Maine is now pretty much concentrated west of 70 degrees. So it's saying that resource has been concentrated in very small areas. And for those familiar with the situation in Newfoundland, that was a problem of the fishery and the population being concentrated on the very small footprint of the population. If you look at Georges Bank haddock and both haddock stocks, that same set of indices are peaked and are trending downward. That is, it's becoming more dispersed. So it's not only high in abundance, but it's very widespread and abundant across the population. So stock assessment is largely an observational science. It's very hard to do true experiments because you can't get in the time machine and reconstruct the past. And you have a lot of issues of measurement problems and different issues of management interventions, and everybody is changing things continuously. Have the closed areas been effective? Well, in 1994 and 1996, some major changes were made. So in 1994, there were about 16,000 square nautical miles were closed to fishing activity. That was followed in 1996 by the Western Gulf of Maine closure area. And both of these were sort of insurance policies. We're saying, if you close an area, we will give these species a rest. Did it work? Well, let's take a look at the scallops. It worked exceptionally well. This shows the graph of the populations in the open and the closed areas. 1994, the area closures went into effect. The open areas increased a little bit, but not pretty much at the same level. The closed areas, however, exploded and went to very high abundance levels. So it was basically because they didn't move, there was an unequivocal demonstration of the power of removals, so that these stocks rebounded quickly. But it becomes, an issue of how do you want to harvest these things? Do you want veal or do you want beef? Do you want pulp or do you want lumber? And here we're looking at the functional equivalent of pulp and here and lumber here. That by restricting harvesting, by figuring out a way to share it. And I like this. There are a lot of famous philosophers in the 17th century. Thomas Brown wasn't one of them, but he did point out some kind of a very important kind of evolutionary principle that nature does nothing in vain. That every life history trait that you observe in nature is a product of millions or hundreds of millions of years of evolution. That it reflects adaptations to an environment that's always changing, and so this is a way in which they can cope with the environment. So here's the sea scallop. I'll go through these quickly here. So another interesting one is the behavior of the fleets following this. So this is for haddock, and these the blue dots on there are the positions of fishing vessels. So this is in 2001, too. So these were, observed trawl tows. And you can kind of see them like ants around the picnic table, in terms of, on the vicinity of that. And what were they doing? Well, they were harvesting haddock. And, these are the counts of haddock in terms of pounds. The red ones were like up to 7,500 pounds per tow. These are the ones that, were fishing that perimeter. And if we kind of quantify that and say, well, what did that mean in terms of how much was being harvested? This next slide shows the haddock catch. And if we take just the distance from closed area 1, around the table, 75% of the harvest in 2002 were within 5 nautical miles of that perimeter. So it was basically a wall of death for the fish as they transited that area. But this is important because it was saying this was an effective area for aggregating. Fishermen learned that this was the area to catch haddock because they were there. And the success of that 1998 year class, the ones that those parents were perfected for 4 years, and they were the ones that was kind of started the jump starting of the haddock restoration. Subsequently, in 2003, another strong year class occurred. These areas have been very effective in terms of getting a very strong and robust recovery. So, how do we keep up with this changing environment? There are a lot of the stock assessment models do keep track of how fast fish are growing. When are they maturing? We've seen for the very high density stocks, they are in fact maturing at a later age because they're not getting enough square meals per day. The recruitment rates in many stocks have increased. In other stocks, such as cod, they've gone way down. And so, we are in fact tracking what's going on very well. We don't necessarily identify underlying cause, but we do see the consequences of those changes. So, it provides a good tracking mechanism for the environment. And I just wanted to show you a couple of instances here. These lines, these multiple lines here, represent the average weight. So this is going from 1 to 4 kilos, about 10 pounds or so on the axis there. So prior to 1994, this was the trajectory of a 9-year-old fish. Since then, since the densities have increased, the 9-year-old fish So the 5-year-old fish in the 1960s and 80s is now is matched in size by the size of the 9-year-old fish. So essentially, we're seeing a very high, a very slow rate of growth. And you can see that a large number of age groups of fish are in this 2 to 3 kilo size range, but in the past they would have been upwards of 4 or 5 kilos. So there's been a dramatic slowing of the growth of haddock, and so this has direct consequences for how much you can take out of the pond. Yes. No. Good question. Yeah, there's a otolith, and we call an ear bone. It's a bone within the skull that provides kind of like a tree ring growth of the individual's growth rate because of the seasonality of growth, temperature swings, and so forth. They accumulate rings of bone, very similar to the way trees accumulate rings, and that allows us to sort of identify, the annual pattern of growth over time. So, and you point out a very important point. If you relied only on length, you would have a dramatically misunderstanding of the dynamics and understanding of the stock. We've seen this. Okay, so we can say, well, maybe this is. I'm sorry. Do you want to ask? Sure. Go back. Yeah. Well, that's a very good question, and one of the things historically it has been demonstrated that they do grow slower during periods of high abundance. So during the 60s, You can see that they're not quite as high as they were during the low abundance periods that followed that, during these periods of intense fishing activity. So there was kind of a two-stage bump up and so forth. But what we're seeing now is a very sharp and dramatic decline in the average size. And it seems to be two factors going. One is a density effect. But if you look at other species which have not experienced those same kinds of density changes, so this is for witch flounder, you can see that these stocks are also experiencing declines in average weight over time. So that's important. That says that there's, in addition to this density effect, there is also an effect due to the environment. And this is for cod, again showing that at one time a 10-year-old cod was about 14 kilos. Now it's on the order of about 8 kilos. So there are changes, and these are cumulative. So that is showing kind of a progressive decline in our reference points. So if we sum up the reference points for all the stocks that we assess, these are in the groundfish complex here. Just in the last 10 years, so from 2005 to 2008, there was a 12% decline in the aggregate production of groundfish. If you go another 7 years, there was another 21%. So there's roughly about a 31%, 32% decline in the system productivity. So this is dramatic, and this has both consequences for what stock size we wish to attain, but more importantly, how much we can take out of the resource. So this one is, I think I will pass through these. This is kind of a demonstration of the productivity of the resources. So if we put all the stocks, so this is the maximum sustainable yield on the y-axis, the biomass on the x-axis. And for high productivity stocks, so this slope is basically how hard you can harvest them. So the harvest rate, if you follow that one, basically what you're going to do is overexploit all those ones that are under that curve there. But if you go to the lowest common denominator, you're going to fish at a much lower rate, but you're going to forego harvesting of a lot of different species. So if you split the difference, what you're going to be doing is under-harvesting some and over-harvesting others. Well, under the law, it doesn't allow you that sort of discretionary. Magnuson-Stevens Act, which is kind of the organic legislation under this thing, is very egalitarian. Everyone gets a fair shake, even dogfish. So you have to know that as kind of a general principle. I'm going to drop the equations because I can see that that's probably kind of a verbal chloroform for everybody. So I'll talk about how do we want to manage these resources. 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Okay, I'm going to get in the hook here in a second. I will accelerate. And I'm very close. So if you look at, where do we want to, we have uncertainty. We don't know these points exactly. So if we manage right at this margin here, you're going to have to do something, half the time, because your overfishing is going to be occurring. The only good part of this curve is right in here, and otherwise you're going to have to restrict fishing over here. You're going to have to dramatically restrict fishing over here so that you can rebuild stocks. So it's like, redlining your engine. You can run your car at 7,000 RPM, but not for very long. Something's going to happen. Your steering's going to go. You're going to blow out your oil. Your rings are going to go, or something like that. So a much better way of managing the resources is away from that margin. Not only do you get, a higher overall level of stock, you got a lot of buffering. You can see that when the pulsing that occurred in Haddock is a good example. That stock, they weren't consistent, but when they did come in, you could exploit them. So you don't want a boom or bust kind of situation on. American lobster, went through that for many, many years, but only when they started to take conservation measures kind of across the board did they become ultimately effective in terms of managing the resource. So I will go through the last slide and allow some time for questions. So what are some of the key ingredients for successful rebuilding? Well, one of them is kind of the closed areas provided this unequivocal demonstration of the power of removals, harvesting. And they can do it, but they're not sufficient because they can only act as an insurance policy. They don't provide or don't correct the situation which created their need in the first place. So if you have too much harvesting activity going on, you will ultimately recreate that situation once you get rid of the insurance policy. The fishing, for example, scallop industry went from an average boat fishing 250 days a year and netting about 400 pounds a day overall, and stocking maybe $100,000. Now the average scallop vessel fishes about 45 days a year, draws maybe $1 to $2 million of revenue, and it's an incredible success story in terms of figuring out a way to share it, how to harvest or shepherd the swings in relative abundance and take advantage of those things. And that was accomplished by having a relatively high degree of industry buy-in. You also need some luck. People aren't going to wait around forever for recovery to occur. So if you get a strong year class, shepherd it through. That was the story for striped bass. When the 1989 year class came in, it became sort of the basis for a long, sustained recovery. It's important to track the situation regularly. You can't have a feedback mechanism that is based on old information. So you can't do tomorrow what you should have done yesterday. There are a lot of technical interactions, including bycatch, which are really super challenging propositions, and truly for interacting species like we have for groundfish. But then, the other one is, don't manage at that margin because you're going to, do a red line on your engine. And then the other thing I think is important: don't give up on Mother Nature. That there are a lot of riches and uncertainty in our knowledge of how nature acts. But we can't forego that for a kind of a doom and gloom scenario. So that kind of summarizes some of the key points in terms of my understanding of this. And I again appreciate all of your time and energy and attending here. And if there are any questions, we can talk further. So thank you.